Next, at our cabinet, I think we're going to work on the base trim or feet of the project. We're going to make that out of solid lumber. It's going to wrap the bottom 3 inches of the cabinet. Before we do that though, we're going to go ahead and take the orbital sander and sand this bottom edge, because once we put trim against there, it's going to make an inside corner that's hard to sand later on. So if we hit it now with the orbital sander, it'll save us some time. Then all we have to do is hand sand it later and we'll be good. Because we ran this through the wide belt sander, we'll want to examine real closely before we put that trim on that we don't have any cross grain. Cross grain would be scratches against the grain from typically our wide belt sander when we get these joints all flush. So if we look closely, we don't see any. Sometimes you can use a light to help and it will pop them out, make them see them a little bit better, but I don't see any showing right now, so we should be good that way. We're going to go get our material ready for our trim. Before I go and cut the trim, we're going to take some measurements. Typically, I'm going to have the longest side of the cabinet, whichever side's the longest, and I'm going to add 4 inches onto that. That's going to give me enough room to cut a miter on both sides and give me a little bit of extra room if I have any bad milling marks or things I need to cut out. So I'm going to measure my project 12 inches this way, little 1/16 under that way, so 12 inches is our long side. We're going to add 4 inches on, so that's going to be 16 inches is how long we're going to cut all 3 trim pieces. We're going to have a trim piece on the front and the 2 sides, nothing on the back. This cabinet is typically going to be against the wall. You wouldn't see the back side. This board is big enough for us to get 2 pieces out of here, so we're going to need to just have 2 lengths cut. And we were going to be at 16 inches, so I'm going to take my tape measure and come out 16 inches and make a mark. And this is my good side. I want to be that side of the mark. I'm going to line it up with the saw. Keep it tight against the fence. All right, so there's one of our pieces. We need one more 16-inch piece. And now we're going to go get these a jointed edge so we can start cutting them down. We have our trim pieces here at the joiner. We're going to get a jointed edge so we can safely run them through the table saw. We're going to turn the dust system on to help with dust management and run them through. We're planning for our feet to finish at 3 inches wide, but I'm going to need a little extra material for the machine to hold on to. So we're going to cut these to 4 inches wide right now so that our machine can hold on to them as it runs it through and puts a profile on there. So we ended up with 4 of these pieces. We are going to choose the best 3 and use those for our trim. And before we run any profile on there, we're going to run them through the wide belt sander and get them smooth on all of our edges, so our faces, so that they sit nice and tight against the cabinet when we're done. So we'll go to the wide belt sander and do that. These are 15/16 thick, so I'll get the machine set up for that. Now we're going to head over to the molder and put a profile in these. This is our molder. This is what's going to be used to cut some of our decorative edges. And on the wall here you can see we have some example profiles of what they might look like when they're done. The knives hang on the wall over here with them, and then you just pick your pattern, find the knives, and we'll set it up. So for today we're going to use this 883. And that's kind of a nice standard one. And so, but it's up to you, whatever choice you want. So we're going to make sure the machine is unplugged. If we follow the power cord, it is right here, not plugged in. So we're going to just set that down here for now. And we're going to pull off the top hood, pull out this rod, and take the top off. Now inside the machine we have our cutter heads. Now if you look closely, you can actually see a little gap right at the end of my pencil. So it's tight here, and over on this side there is a gap. We don't want that. We want this knife to be sitting nice and tight against there. Okay, let's take a look at the other side. This side looks good. It's nice and tight that whole way across. We're going to check both of them to make sure they're set where we want them though. We're never going to assume that a machine is set up for what we need. The guy before you or the student before you may have not set it up correctly. So we're going to loosen these little bolts on here. They weren't on there very tight either, so that's one thing you want to do. And so these are the knives we're going to use, but I'm just going to make sure they're set right. I'm going to make sure they're tight against that bottom lip. There's a lip right there. And there should be some slack in there from the holes. The bolts are a little bit smaller than the holes, so there's a little bit of slack or play in there. It doesn't matter which way you push that. Choose one of your liking and make sure it's tight against the bolts and down against the edge. And then go ahead and re-secure those fasteners. And go ahead and get them tight once they're in place. Be careful, this can be a knuckle buster. If your wrench slips off of there, you can very easily hit your knuckles and kind of bust them open. We're going to turn the blades over and do the other side. This is that one that has that gap in there that you can see. We're going to loosen those. Again, we're not taking them off. And we want that slack or play to be the same on this side. So I chose back towards the machine motor there. I'm going to do that again on this side, make sure I'm nice and tight, and go ahead and tighten those up. Okay, so those are in there nice and secure. I have no gap by that edge there. We're nice and tight on both sides. That looks good. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to raise the head up so we can get one of our boards underneath there. So our board won't fit underneath here because these rollers, you can kind of see them in there, there's feed rollers in front and back. They sit lower than the blade so that when we cut this, those rollers are still touching. So from the operator side over here, there's a little T-handle. We're going to loosen that, and then we're going to raise this up so our board will fit underneath there. Okay, doesn't have to be very high. And then we're going to loosen this fence and move this left fence out of the way for now. And I'm going to take one of my boards and set it in here. So what I'm looking for is this profile. I want this profile right here. We're not going to have too much of this lip. I don't want to be outside the edge of this profile. You can kind of see on the video there that it's burnt here, and that's because this edge of the cutter is not sharp, and so it got hot when cutting that. So I'm going to get that lined up so that the edge of my board down here is somewhere on this flat edge. Okay? And we're going to make sure that the fence is straight. So in order to make sure the fence is straight, I'm going to take my tape measure and measure. Right here I'm at 1.25 inches. If I come to the other side of the machine and measure, I'm at 1 3/8 inches. Okay, so I'm going to pick one of those sizes and get the other size to that. We're going to go with 1 3/8 inches and tighten that up. Okay, and it doesn't hurt to double check. Make sure both sides are the same. Now this other left-handed side of the fence just gets pushed up tight against the machine, or up against your board. So this fence is keeping the board tight against this fence. So I'm going to just kind of push it in a little bit on this side. You'll see that there's kind of a springy action to the whole thing. So I'm going to come over to this side and push it tight so that as it goes through, it's keeping it tight to that fence. All right, so that looks good. Now what we're going to do is, and the reason we left this 4 inches wide, that gives us our cutter plus a little extra room. If our cutter is removing off material, then these feed rollers in the back here don't have anything to grab onto. So because we left our board a good inch bigger than the cutter, that will give the machine something to hold it down tight to the table, so we'll have less vibration and movement on our workpiece. So we're going to set this now. We finished about 7/8 inch thick. So I'm going to use the ruler over here, make sure the T-handle's loose, and I'm going to use the ruler and the top edge of this red machine here to get my size set. So I'm going down to about 7/8 of an inch. We will be running our piece twice, at least twice. The first time is going to remove the bulk of the material, kind of get the shape put in there. We're going to lower it 1/16 of an inch and run it again, and that's going to do our finish cut and give us a nice smooth cut when we're done. Okay, we need to put the hood back on before we start, so we'll get that in place. Okay, that's secure, and we need to plug the machine in. This one is one of our very few 220 volt outlets. It's got a unique looking prong. It shares with our hinge press, so you'll have to unplug one machine before you can use the other. And the blast gate's open, and the dust system should be on. We got the dust system on. We're going to turn the machine on, make sure the emergency stop is pulled out, and then use the green button to turn it on. You'll want to make sure you pay attention to the orientation when it comes out, so that your next pass, you don't end up cutting it on the other side of the board. So make sure you pay attention how it comes out of the machine, so when we line it up again for our next pass, we're cutting that same edge. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen the T-handle, and I'm going to lower it down about 1/16 of an inch and tighten it back up, and we're going to do it again. So examining my profile here, I noticed that this lip right here is not very thick. And so I think I might run this another 1/16 of an inch down so we can make this line a little bit more pronounced. And that way it just has a little bit more defining. If I sand it, I don't actually sand it away, things like that. So I'm gonna run it one more time. I'm gonna loosen the T-handle, lower it another 1/16 of an inch, tighten it up, and we're going to run all three again. You can see the difference there, a much bigger line. All right, we're back at the table saw, and now what we need to do is decide what we want to keep on this profile. We have designed our project to have a 3-inch tall trim, and right now we're at 4 inches. So we've got to decide, do you want this lip on here, or do you want to try to cut that off? And then when you cut, after you decide what you want to do with that, then you'll turn it around and cut the rest off. So I'm going to try to get it so this radius is the top edge of my piece. I don't want this lip on here. So I'm going to use the table saw to do that. I'm going to put this piece between the fence and the blade, my big piece of wood. I would not try to cut this off. One, you're going to hit the guard and not have enough clearance. And we want to make sure we get that set right. So I'm going to use my eyeballs here. You could take a tape measure and measure that as well. However you would like to determine that size. So I'm just gonna take it up to the sawtooth there and get it on there, and we're gonna go ahead and cut this. Okay. So what we're looking for is that profile to be gone, that top lip. There's just a slight sliver left, so I need to go just a little bit more. What you do to one of these, you need to do to all of them. So if we were to cut the lip off of one, we need to do the lip off of all of them all at the same time, one right after the other. Don't make any changes or adjustments in between. Okay, that way everything is all the same. When we cut our angles on there, the profile should all match up nice. So now we're going to turn the board around. We're going to set the fence to the final size of 3 inches. And we're going to rip these down. When cutting the miters for these trim pieces, I like to use this smaller 10-inch saw, 10-inch circular saw blade. The other miter saw that slides has a 12-inch blade. The 12-inch blade is going to have a little bit more warp and stuff with the metal. The metal is going to flex a little bit more as it is spinning and turning and cutting and heating up. So I like to use a smaller blade to get a little bit more precise cut. Again, with any machine, you need to make sure the cord is in good condition before you plug it in. That's your responsibility as the operator. And then we are going to cut our miter. So we're going to stand the workpiece up like this, and we need to make sure the flat edge is to the back fence. If we have that turned around and we hold it tight, then we're going to get a double angle because it's not sitting flat against there. So we want to have the flat edge against there. We're going to use 45 degrees on this base here. 45 degrees is what we're going to set this to. We're going to be going from both sides. So I'm going to turn this handle, loosen it, get it to 45. It should snap in. You can tighten the handle back up. And then I'm just going to take a very minimal amount off to get this going. So just a tiny bit. Make sure I get a cut the whole way. All right, so there's one edge of our board. And let's take another one, and we're going to do the other edge. And now I've got to switch my arms over so I'm not crossing my arms. Get that lined up. All right, so we have our two pieces. This is enough to get one side going here. Now, I think this has a better grain, so I want that to be on the front, and I'm going to have this one be my left side. So if I get these lined up so my miters match up, my profile looks good. Take your time, do the job justice here, and make sure it's lined up nice. Then we can hold down the front one and take our pencil, and you can make a mark on the back side. That mark on the back side that we just made would be this line of the cut. Okay. All right, we're ready to install the trim or feet. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have this project laying on its back like this. And the reason for that is when we put our trim on here, we want to put the nails in from the bottom side so we have no visible fasteners from the outside. So that's why we're going to do it on its back so we can get in underneath and shoot these on. The nails or fastener is just going to hold it kind of like a clamp until the glue dries. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue on here. We want to avoid the top edge. We don't want to put this down and have it ooze out up here on the inside corner. So I'm going to just kind of push this down. I'm going to get that glue to kind of spread out in there, and I'm going to take one of my two side pieces and use this for a guide to line up this corner. So I'm getting this lined up. I'm going to shoot a staple from the back side up, and I'm just going to put one in for now. Watch your hands to make sure it doesn't come out the inside, and I shifted it around a little bit, so I got to reset that up. And now I'm going to come to the other side. I'm just going to put one in each side for now because that will allow me to bend those nails and reposition this if it moves on me. So now I'm going to come over here and get this side lined up. Shoot one nail in there. Okay, and then what we're going to do is now we can start lining up the sides. We're going to put glue on here again. This time we're going to put just a little bit of glue on the miter. So this is the top edge here. It gets kind of thin, so I'm going to stay back just a little bit and put glue kind of in that area. You could take your finger and spread it out if you need to so that it doesn't ooze out on you when it comes time. Then I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to get my staple gun, and I'm going to staple in one there, and we're going to come to the bottom side and try to get that straight, and I'm going to put one in down here. We're going to go to the other side now, same process. And a little bit of glue on the miter. This one shifted a little bit on me. I'm going to have to move this, and I'll show you how to do that in just a sec here. So I'm going to get this one lined up with the edge of this board down here. And come to the bottom. Okay, so now this joint is not quite matching up here. It's a little high on this one. So what we can do is take a scrap piece of wood and put it up against our trim, and then we can take a mallet and bend this nail till these come even. So if I just take and lightly tap on that, we'll see that start to close up. I'm going to stand it up and see how it looks that way. The top edge looks pretty good. This one is actually out a little far on the bottom, so we can do that same process here and tap that in a little bit. And I still need to mess with this one a little bit more. Okay, that's looking pretty good on my edges. I'm going to come back and fill in a couple more staples now. Again, we're doing this on the inside so there's no visible fasteners. And a couple in the middle. All right, so there's our trim. Now if you have any spots that it looks good right here on the corner, but down here it's sticking out a little bit, we could try to finesse that with some sandpaper and get that filled up or filed down for you. Okay, trim is probably the most difficult thing of the project. The trim and the cabinet drawer will be the two most difficult things for you to do typically. All right, so we've got a little bit of a gap right here in the foot where we put our miter together. Very small, minute little gap. It overhangs just slightly, so that needs to be sanded, and then we're going to put a little filler in there. So if you need to, we can use filler on very small cracks. We should not be using the filler to fill things bigger than about 1/8 of an inch. Otherwise, it's just too much. The best way is just to use your finger, and you're going to take and rub that into the crack. I'm going to get some in that nail hole that was there from our side. And anywhere you put it on, we need to get it off when we're done. So the only place the filler should be is in the crack, not on the wood. So I'm going to just try to rub it into that crack so that we don't see it, and then get off any excess that we have. Okay, and you can let this dry for maybe 2-3 minutes, let it start to get stiffened up, and then take some sandpaper to it. The longer we let this sit, the harder it's going to dry. And it's going to dry pretty strong when we're done. So I'm going to start sanding it now and shaping it. And I'm just going to take my sandpaper and kind of fold it to fit into the grooves of that joint or of the profile and get all of it. I don't want any filler on the wood when we're done. It should only be in the crack. So I've got to take my time and get that off. We do have a little bit of a flat spot on the edge of that miter, and that's because it was just slightly long, but we're sanding it so we don't feel that lip on there. So it shouldn't be too noticeable from the front, but there is a small flat edge on there that we have created. And we wanted to make sure all that filler is off the corner. If you have pencil mark from where you laid out your miters and got your cuts, you will need to sand off any pencil marks. And then the other thing is sometimes you get saw blade marks from when we cut this on the table saw. So there are saw blade marks on here, and you can kind of see little hash or angle marks on there, and you'll have to just take your sandpaper by hand and sand those off. Try not to hit the plywood too much, because then we're going to be sanding against the grain. We're trying to hit just the trim piece here. You can see why it was important to sand that lower half of the cabinet before putting on that trim, because now that that trim is on, we have an inside corner, and it would be difficult to get our orbital sander up against there without hitting this piece or the trim and kind of creating a groove in there. So we sanded it ahead of time. Now we just have to come back and sand by hand before we put a finish on.